Yeah, it is on.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to this PhD thesis defense of P.N. Karthik. P.N. Karthik is a PhD student at the ECE department. He's going to speak about sequential control sensing, detect an anomalous process. Over to you, Karthik.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Hello, everyone. Welcome to my thesis defense. So this is joint work with my PhD supervisor, Professor Rajesh Sundaresan. So the journey has been very exciting. I hope to share some of the findings that we did with all of you. So let's get started. I'll begin with the motivation for our work. The motivation comes from the desire to carry out a detailed mathematical analysis of the following visual search experiment. So imagine that you are shown this array of images. In this array, one of the images is different from the rest, and the goal is to find this odd image as quickly and accurately as possible without guessing. So as many of you may have already found, the odd image is at this location. Let's repeat this exercise on a different set of image pairs. In this case, the odd image happens to be at this location here. Perhaps some of you took lesser time to find the odd image in this example than in the previous example. Okay, one last time. On this set of image pairs, as it is quite evident, the odd image is here. It is very likely that you found this example to be the easiest of the three. So what we learned from the previous examples is that the time to find the odd image depends on the specific image pairs that are used. Perhaps most of you took more time to find the odd image in the first example, lesser time in the second, and the least in the third. Also, the closer the image pairs are to the eyes, the longer it takes to find out the odd image. This was very evident in the third example, where the odd image stood out very well from the other images. Now, typically in visual neuroscience experiments like these, a participant is shown each of these image pairs multiple times, with the odd image location being different each time. So the participant will not only look to find out the odd image as quickly as possible, but he will also want to ensure that he is correct most of the time. So there are like two quantities of interest. One is the time to find the odd image, and the other is the error or the probability of error in reporting the final answer. That is the location of the odd image. Ideally, we would like both of these quantities to be small, but it turns out that these quantities compete with each other. There are two resources which are competing with each other. So just to understand this, if the desired error probability is small, the participants will have to carry out the search carefully so that they don't err too many times, because they have to maintain that error probability within a certain threshold that they are given. So therefore, one may have to wait longer before announcing the location of the odd image if the error given is small, if the room for committing error is small. So in order to characterize the relationship between these quantities, it is customary to fix one of them and analyze the behavior of the other. Throughout this talk, we will be fixing the error probability, and we will be looking at the behavior of the time to find the odd image as a function of error. So this is what is called as the fixed confidence regime. Okay, now suppose pi is some strategy to find the odd image. Each of you had your own strategy to find the odd image in these examples. Suppose tau pi is the time that is required to find the odd image under your strategy pi. Given an error probability threshold epsilon, let pi epsilon denote the collection of all policies, all strategies whose error probability is at most epsilon. Okay, these are all the desired policies for us. Now, for the case of the static image pairs, Vaidyan et al. In these two works show that the average time to identify the odd image grows as a logarithm of 1 over epsilon. Here, epsilon is the error probability threshold. So this expected time to find the odd image grows as logarithm of 1 over epsilon. It is intuitive that smaller the error, the longer the time that one may take. And this is a precise characterization of the relationship between the time to find the odd image and the error probability. Equivalently, by taking limits as epsilon goes to 0, one can say that the limiting growth rate is some constant, which is alpha. This is a problem instance dependent constant. It depends on the specific image pairs that are shown. So paper 1 here analyzes the case where these image pairs I1 and I2 are given beforehand. They are known beforehand to the participant of the experiment. And the paper 2 here studies the case where I1 and I2 are not known beforehand. Okay, so this is as far as the static images are concerned. Our interest is to move from static images to a slightly more sophisticated setting, which is that of movies. Now imagine a visual search experiment like this, where you are shown 8 patches of drifting dots movies. The dots in each of these movies drift at a certain angle. The angle of drift in one of these movies is different, and that in all the other movies is some other value. Okay, and the goal is to identify the odd movie, that is the one which has a different drift, as quickly as possible. So many of you may have found out that this is the location of the odd movie. What makes this different is that the angle of drift is different here. Let's repeat this exercise on a different set of movie pairs. Again, the goal here is to identify the odd movie as quickly and accurately as possible. Okay. Now, the difference between this example and the previous example is that the drift here, the drift of the odd movie and the non-odd movies are closer to each other than in the previous example. In other words, the angle of drift, the difference between the angles of drift, I have kept it a little small here. In the previous example, it was a little higher. Okay, so one may see that this is actually the odd movie. I don't know how many of you could identify it. Perhaps most of you found it a little difficult to identify the odd movie in this example than in the previous example. So again, as we see, the time to find the odd movie depends on the particular values of the drifts of the odd movie and the non-odd movies. And the closer these drifts are to the eyes, the longer it will take for us to find the odd movie. And we want to do a precise characterization of the time required to find the odd movie as a function of error probability, just like how Vaidyan et al. Had done for the case of static images. Here, we have drifts D1 and D2, and we would like to come up with an answer like this. Now, the thing is, we only anticipate that it could probably be logarithm of 1 over epsilon. Is this actually the case is the question we are after. That is the time to find the odd movie dependent on the error probability in a logarithmic way, in a logarithm of the inverse way? Is this actually true is the question. If so, what is this constant alpha? Can we precisely characterize this problem instance dependent constant? We show that the answer to this question is yes. Okay, we actually do such a characterization, and a detailed analysis of this characterization is what the rest of the talk will be about. Okay, now we came from visual neuroscience perspective. We started on this problem from a visual neuroscience perspective, but there are plenty of other applications where finding such odd or anomalous behavior in systems finds relevance. For example, if we have a power grid where there is a faulty power line, one may be interested in finding this faulty power line as quickly as possible so that the overall configuration of the power grid is known. Also, in recommender systems, for example, if there is a malicious ad that is put up on a site, the site owner may want to identify that malicious ad as quickly as possible and remove it so as to enhance the security of the site on the whole. And of course, there is this whole framework of A/B testing. And then if you are in a cognitive radio network, for example, where the secondary user is searching for a free channel to transmit its information, all this, the secondary user may want to find this free channel as quickly as possible. So there are plenty of scenarios, settings where this anomalies appear, and finding these anomalies in systems is quite important. Okay, so there are plenty of applications. We come from a visual neuroscience perspective. Now, before we proceed, I would like to abstract out this problem, come up with a model, and give a solution to that model so that it is applicable in more general settings. Okay, now what we do is we recognize that each drifting dots movie is simply a sequence of frames over time. With this recognition, one can draw a parallel between the odd movie experiment that is shown here and the topic of multi-armed bandits. So this is our abstraction now. So how are they related? A movie is like an arm of a multi-armed bandit. A movie is a sequence of frames over time. An arm is a sequence of observations over time. So a frame is like an observation for us. Now, we assume, the positions of the dots in successive frames of a movie are dependent on each other. For example, in the odd movie, which is marked here, the dots are moving from the bottom right corner to the top left corner. So the dots, the positions of the dots in any two successive frames are dependent on each other, and this can be captured by saying that the observations from a Markov process. We consider the first order Markov dependence. Now, as a simplification, that is to start the analysis of this problem, to begin, what we assume is that the participant of the experiment focuses his attention on one movie location at a time. Now, this is obviously not true. Many of us may not agree with this because our eyes can grasp information from multiple locations at the same time. That is a slightly more sophisticated model of a sophisticated visual model. I'll comment about that towards the end of the talk. But for now, to begin with, to start our analysis, we assume that the participant fixes his attention to one movie location at a time. Now, that is analogous to saying that one arm of a multi-arm bandit is selected at any given time. Okay, and then the most important point to observe here is that the unobserved movies continue to play whether or not they are observed. Now, this in the setting of multi-arm bandits is what is called the setting of restless arms. The drift of one of the movies is different. Now, that is analogous to saying that the transition law of one of the Markov processes of one of the arms is different. Okay, so combining all these ideas together, here is our problem setup. Okay, and of course, the goal for us is to identify the anomalous Markov arm or the odd arm, the odd movie in the example, as quickly and accurately as possible. So the problem setup is as follows. We have a multi-arm bandit. We assume that there are at least 3 arms in the bandit to start with, so that the notion of odd arm will make sense. Each arm for us is going to be a time homogeneous and ergodic Markov process. Now, these regularity conditions are to make the problem amenable to analysis. Okay, or we assume that all these Markov processes evolve on a common finite state space. What is the state space in the movie example? In the movie, each frame captures the positions of the dots in a certain way, and you can think of the state space as the 8-bit representation of the state of the frame as the 8-bit representation of the frame itself. So there are 256 possible frame values. These are the states that each frame can take. So that's the state space. Now, the transition law of one of the arms is different. Let's call this arm as the odd arm from now on. Okay. Now, let's say that the transition law of that arm is some P1. The transition law of rest of the arms is some P2. The P1 and the P2 may or may not be known. Okay. Importantly, the arms are restless. And as I said, the P1 and P2 may or may not be known. And what's our goal? Just like Vaidyan et al.'s goal, our goal is to characterize the limiting growth rate of the time required to find the odd movie subject to error probability constraints. Okay. In other words, this is the constant that we are after. Can we precisely capture this constant? So in asking this question, I'm inherently asking myself, is the growth actually like logarithm of 1 over epsilon? If that is so, can we capture this constant? That is the question we are after. So I'll be providing answers to this question in multiple stages. Now it turns out that this restless arms setting, where the movies continue to play in the movies example, that setting is a little difficult to analyze directly to begin with. Okay, so in order to begin our analysis, what we do is we consider a slightly simpler setting, which is that of rested arms. What does this mean in the movie context? It just means that everything else in the problem is same. Just that the movies, when one movie is observed at a time, when the participant in the experiment wishes to switch his attention to a different movie location, all the other movies are paused. They don't evolve. Okay, so that is what is called as a setting of rested arms. Okay, an arm will evolve only when it is observed. If it is not observed, it remains frozen. Now, this rested arm setting may not have a direct practical applicability in practical situations, but we will see that the key ideas that we derive from the analysis of this setting will be very helpful for us when we analyze the more difficult setting of restless arms, which is practically more relevant. So just to put our work in perspective, our work comes under the framework of sequential hypothesis testing. So the very broad class of problems under which our work falls is what is called optimal stopping. Okay. Usually when we think of multi-arm bandits, there is this notion of regret minimization and all of that. Here, it's in contrast to that setting, we are operating in the setting of optimal stopping. And the framework in which we are operating is that of sequential hypothesis testing, in particular, active sequential hypothesis testing. Active simply means that there are a set of alternatives to choose from at each time instant. And our work falls somewhere here, like we are at the leaf of this whole tree, if you were to think of it that way. Nevertheless, this is a very important leaf that we have actually filled in. The analysis for this problem, what we call as odd arm identification, identification of the odd arm or the anomalous arm, was done for the case of IID observations from the arms in the works of Vaidyan et al. We have extended this analysis for the setting of Markov observations. Now, there are other related problems such as best arm identification. Both odd arm identification and best arm identification can be generalized to some extent. I will talk about these generalizations towards the end of the talk. Okay, so this is how our problem stands. We are going to begin with the analysis of the setting of Markov observations from the arms. What I'm going to first do is I'll talk about the setting of rested arms. I will talk about some key ideas that we came up with for analyzing the rested arm setting. We will then use these ideas to solve the restless arm setting. I'll present all of these ideas. Okay. So I'll now begin with the setting of rested arms. As I said, everything else in the problem remains the same, except that the arms are now rested. We assume that the TPMs are not known to begin with. The case of known TPMs is a little easy. It's like a straightforward extension of the analysis that was carried out by Vaidyan et al. For the case of static images, where it was assumed that the arms yield IID observations. So from the IID setting, the case of rested arms with known TPMs is a straightforward extension, so we don't consider that. We consider the setting where the TPMs are not known and have to be learned along the way. So I'll not keep any surprises. Very quickly, our contributions are like this. Suppose C equal to H P1 P2 is a problem instance. By this, I mean that H is the location of the odd arm, P1 is the TPM of the odd arm, P2 is the TPM of the non-odd arms, all of the non-odd arms. All the three are unknown in the problem. Okay, so in this figure, for example, arm 3 is the odd arm, P1 is its TPM, and P2 is the TPM of all the other arms. We will call this configuration as 3, P1, P2. That's all I'm saying. So we give a lower bound. There is some problem instance, there is some arms configuration which we don't know. For that arms configuration, there is a configuration dependent lower bound that comes out. D star is the constant. We call that constant as D star. It has a certain expression. We also give a scheme, an arm selection scheme, which will help us achieve this lower bound as the error probability epsilon goes to 0. So throughout our analysis, so we analyze the setting of asymptotic. We analyze the case where the error probability vanishes to 0. That is, we focus on the asymptotic analysis. Okay. So our answer is this. We give a precise characterization of the growth rate of the time required to find the odd arm subject to error probability constraints. The answer is 1 over D star. Okay, D star has this kind of an expression. It depends on the odd arm it depends on the unknowns in the problem. Okay, specifically on P1 and P2, which are the transition probability matrices of the odd and the non-odd arms. So very quickly, how does this rested arms setting look like? Okay, so for example, let's say arm 1 is selected at time 0, arm 2 is selected at time 1, and so on. Notice how the subscript of all of these observations is 0. It means that we are at time 0 on each of these arms. Now let's say arm 3 is selected again. Notice that its subscript has changed to 1, which means that the local clock of arm 3 changes only when it is selected. Otherwise, it doesn't change. Similarly for the other arms. Okay, the local clock of each arm evolves only when it is selected. So that is as far as the rested arms setting is concerned. Now what we do is we look at all the arms that have been pulled up to a certain time n and the observations that we have obtained from all of these pulled arms up to a certain time n. Okay, and what do we do with all these observations? We write down the log likelihood. That is the starting point of our analysis. Okay, we write down the log likelihood under any given problem instance. We don't even know what the problem instance is. So what we do is we write down the log likelihoods under two different arm configurations or two different problem instances. and we try to analyze the log likelihood ratio between these problem instances. Of course, because the true problem instance is not known, there are uncountably many possible problem instances, because P1 and P2, which are the TPMs, can take uncountably many values. So we have to search for the true problem instance among all these problem instances. Okay. Don't worry about the exact expressions for these. What is very important, and this is the key idea that we use in the setting of rested arms. This is the idea. Let's focus on arm 3. It was selected at time, so it was selected 4 times in this example. Its local clock evolved 4 times, and then we had x03, x13, x23, x33. The superscript is the arm, the subscript is the time. Now notice that first x03 was selected, then when x13 was selected, there was a transition from x03 to x13. Then from x13 to x23, there was a transition. From x23 to x33, there was a transition. For the intermediate states, x13 and x23, every transition to was matched by a transition from. There was a transition to matched by a transition from. However, for the initial state x03 and the final state x33, for the initial state, there is only a transition from, and for the final state, there is only a transition to. What does this mean? This means that if you look at the transitions from a certain state, and if you look at the transitions to a certain state, they are only differing by plus minus 1. That's all. When you divide by n and take limits, these limits are the same. Okay, this is the most important observation we use. What is the observation? The fraction of transitions from a certain state are equal to the fraction of transitions to that state. Now, because we assume that each arm is ergodic, these common transitions, these transitions are equal to the stationary probability of observing a certain state. This is the main idea we use in the analysis. So using this, we build the converse. First, we write down the log likelihood ratio. What we do is we upper bound the log likelihood ratio with the expected time required to find the odd arm. Now, this upper bounding is an information theoretic bottleneck. It says that there is a certain maximum amount of discrimination that we can do per unit time. And it is in deriving such an upper bound that we use something called Wald's lemma. Now, Wald's lemma is usually applicable for the setting of IID observations. We extend Wald's lemma. We use a version of Wald's lemma for Markov observations because we have Markov chains. So this is one part of the converse. The other part of the converse is data processing based on the idea that we have to satisfy a certain desired error probability. Notice that the problem instance is not known. Our policies have to work for all possible problem instances. So if you have this problem instance where H is the location of the odd arm, our policy should output H with a probability of at least 1 minus epsilon. If the problem instance is H prime, that is, if the problem instance is such that the odd arm location is H prime, our policy should output H prime with a probability of at least 1 minus epsilon. So using this fact, using the data processing inequality, you can we can lower bound this expected log likelihood ratio with this quantity. This quantity is simply the KL divergence between a Bernoulli epsilon and a Bernoulli 1 minus epsilon. Okay, so this comes from data processing. We will combine both of these and we arrive at something like this. Okay, so the growth rate is logarithm of 1 over epsilon. This comes from the fact that this KL divergence term looks like logarithm of 1 over epsilon as epsilon goes to 0. That is how we get the logarithmic growth rate. Taking limits, we arrive at the lower bound. That's all. This is as simple as that. The converse comes from an information theoretic bottleneck, Wald lemma type identities for Markov processes combined with data processing inequality. Okay, now let's try to understand achievability. So achievability requires us to understand the constant D star in the lower bound in a slightly little more detail. So suppose this is the arms configuration, that is, this is the problem instance. P1 is the TPM of arm 3. Now, what are all the alternative problem instances for this is what we have to ask, because we don't know the true problem instance. So given a problem instance, there are always many alternatives, uncountably many alternatives actually. What are the alternatives? The alternatives are those where the odd arm is located in any other location other than 3, and the TPMs are any arbitrary P1 prime, P2 prime, which are not equal to each other. That's all. There are so many possible alternatives. Now it turns out that among all these alternatives, there is only one alternative that is very important for us, and that is the nearest alternative. Nearest in what sense? Nearest in the sense of KL divergence between the rows of the TPMs. Okay. So it turns out that the nearest alternative, one can work out and explicitly show that the nearest alternative for this problem instance, this specific problem instance, is the one in which P1 prime is equal to P2. P2 prime is a convex combination of P1 and P2, and the location of the odd arm is any location other than 3. In fact, there are 3 possible nearest alternatives, if you want to call it that way. Okay, the location can be any location other than 3. And then the TPM of the odd arm in that location has to be P2, and the TPM of all the other arms must be a convex combination of P1 and P2. One can explicitly work this out. This is the nearest alternative. What D star tells us is that the amount of effort required to battle this nearest alternative is what is captured by D star. In other words, this nearest alternative is very confusing. One can easily get confused between this problem instance versus its nearest alternative. If we should not get confused by this nearest alternative, we have to resolve this correctly, and the amount of effort required to resolve this correctly, that is to identify that this is an alternative and not the true one, is the effort that is required, and that's captured by D star. Okay. Now the expression for D star is like this. Lambda here is a probability distribution on the arms, and the C prime here is all possible alternative configurations in which the odd arm location is anything other than H. Now, the maximum, the lambda, we can show that there is a unique lambda, that is a unique probability distribution on the arms that achieves this maximum. So for each possible problem instance, HP1, P2, there is an optimal lambda which achieves the maximum here. Let's call that lambda star for the problem instance HP1, P2. Now, because we don't know the true problem instance, we keep estimating the problem instance as and when we keep collecting observations. So at time n, let's say these are our estimates. H hat n is our estimate of the odd arm. P hat H hat n1 is our estimate of the TPM of H hat n. And P hat H hat n, 2 is our estimate of the TPM of all arms other than H hat n. Now, one way to ensure that our estimation procedure is efficient is to make sure that these estimates converge to the true problem instance, which may not be known. But if they converge to the true problem instance, then we can say that our estimation procedure is efficient. Now, if this happens, notice that in this expression for D star, this maximum is attained by lambda star HP1, P2. So what this expression is telling us is that in order to attain this constant, in order to achieve this constant D star in the lower bound, we need to sample the arms according to lambda star for HP1, P2. Otherwise, we cannot get D star. So because we don't know what is HP1, P2, we also don't know the exact lambda star HP1, P2. But if we can eventually touch this lambda star HP1, P2, we are good enough. We will eventually be sampling according to lambda star HP1, P2, and we will eventually get to the lower bound. So if our estimates converge to the true values, we would also like the lambda stars for these estimates to converge to the true lambda star. That is the optimal lambda star for the underlying problem instance. Now, this we can guarantee in this problem setting because this mapping here is continuous. Because this mapping is continuous, if H hat P hat converges to HP, then the lambda star for the H hat P hats will converge to the lambda star for HP. This is the key idea we use. We keep sampling according to lambda star H hat P hat. We just keep sampling according to that. Eventually, we will touch the optimal lambda star for the underlying configuration. So based on all these ideas, we come up with a test statistic. I'm not going to explain the details of what test statistic this is. I'll only mention here that this test statistic is a slight variant of the classical generalized likelihood ratio test statistic. Okay, many of you may be familiar with the GLRT test statistic. In that, there is a logarithm of maximum likelihood by maximum likelihood, correct? In the GLR test statistic, we will only modify the numerator. Instead of the maximum likelihood in the numerator, we will replace it with an average likelihood, where the average is computed with respect to some artificially constructed trier. Okay, I'm not going to go into the details. The only key things in this slide are that number one, the test statistic is of the form average by maximum, logarithm of average by maximum. There are exact expressions for the ML estimates of the TPMs. So the estimates P hat I showed on the previous slide are actually the ML estimates. And these ML estimates of the TPMs have closed form expressions. There is an explicit expression for each of these estimates. Okay. Let's keep this in mind because I'll come back to addressing these points when I come to the restless setting. Okay, so with these, we construct a policy. In this policy, it's a very simple policy. Keep sampling the arms until the test statistic exceeds a certain threshold. If it exceeds a certain threshold, stop and declare the odd arm. That's all. The important point to notice here is that whenever we want to sample, we will sample according to the lambda star for the estimated configuration or the estimated problem instance at that time. So these estimates are running estimates. At each time n, we keep estimating H hat and P hats. Assuming that the estimates itself is the true configuration, assuming that the estimate itself represents the underlying truth, we continue to sample the arms. Thanks to the continuity of the lambda stars, we will eventually touch the optimal value and everything will work out fine. Okay. So there are two parameters here, L and delta in our policy. What we show is that the policy stops in finite time with probability 1. We are correct with a very high probability. In other words, if we are given an epsilon error probability threshold, we can meet the error probability threshold by setting the parameter L appropriately. If we set L equal to 1 over epsilon, we are guaranteed to be epsilon tolerable. Okay, and the upper bound of the policy is something called D delta. It is not D star, but the D delta converges to D star as delta goes to 0. In other words, we can come arbitrarily close to the lower bound by setting the parameter delta. That is where is the usefulness of the two parameters L and delta. L controls the error, delta controls the gap between the upper and the lower bound. In the limit as delta goes to 0, we touch the lower bound. And combining this with the lower bound, we have this result where I said D star has this expression. So these are the key ideas. Okay. So our policy is based on certainty equivalence. It is based on ML estimation of the TPMs. The ML estimates have a closed form expression. Okay. Just remember these 3 points in the achievability. The converse was based on data processing inequality and a wall type lemma for Markov processes, specifically rested Markov processes. So these are the key ideas. Okay. Now one may ask, why not just learn the TPMs of the arms by repeatedly sampling the arms? Why even go to ML estimation? Now the point is that for each possible arms configuration, we have the lambda star. Okay. And it is according to this lambda star that we should eventually sample the arms. Otherwise, we will not be able to reach the lower bound, because the constant in the lower bound explicitly tells us that lambda star is how the arms should be sampled. If we repeatedly keep on sampling the arms, there is no guarantee that this will happen. Whereas our certainty equivalence approach will guarantee that we will eventually sample the arms according to lambda star. Okay, this is one reason why we don't consider the repeated sampling of the arms. This is something that naturally appeals to everyone, and everybody feels that this is what ought to be done in order to find out the odd arm very quickly. But guarantees on the performance of the policy, one may not be able to establish those. Okay.
Karthik, can I ask a question? Can you go back to
yes, sir.
You mentioned maximum likelihood. Even if you sample repeatedly, you would still use maximum likelihood only to do the estimations, right?
Correct. Only to do the estimation. So by repeatedly sampling the arms, in fact, the maximum likelihood estimates will still have closed form expressions. And because the arms are ergodic, these maximum likelihood estimates will still converge to the true values. However, the lambda stars, that is the sampling an arm at any given time, according to the lambda star for the underlying configuration, is the key idea in our analysis. Because if we do that, thanks to the continuity of the lambda stars, eventually we are going to reach the lambda star for the underlying configuration. It is not just about the convergence of ML estimates to the true values. It is also about the convergence of the lambda. It is also about reaching the lambda star for the underlying problem instance. That is the most important point in the lower bound. In order to touch the lower bound, Eventually, we must sample according to the lambda star for the HP1, P2. If that can be guaranteed by some means, then we are in business.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So this is as far as the rested arm setting is concerned. So the takeaway, that the most important lesson that I learned from the setting of rested arms is that even though it may not have direct practical applicability, it taught me a very important lesson, which is the number of transitions from and to match. So there is an invariant quantity in the problem. This invariant quantity, it was very important for us to capture this invariant quantity. We will see why this is important, because looking for such invariant quantities in analysis will make the problem so much easier. It will simplify the problem to an extent where it starts becoming amenable to analysis. So this was the takeaway for me from the setting of rested arms. Now, the next setting is that of restless arms, the more practical setting. In this practical setting, there are two versions. The TPMs may be known or may not be known. Now, the TPMs not known is the more practical version, I would say, because in reality, we may not know the TPMs. That's a slightly harder setting again to resolve. So we will first consider the setting where arms are restless, but the TPMs are known. If the TPMs are known, at least the difficulty with not knowing the TPMs is gotten away with. At least we can get to know what is it that the restless setting entails. What is it that the restless setting brings with it that is different from the rested setting? So that's why we consider this setting first. Everything else is the same, the problem, goal, everything is the same, just that the arms are restless, TPMs are known beforehand. Okay, very quickly, our contributions are like this, very, very similar to the contributions in the rested setting. We characterize the growth rate. We show that the growth rate is indeed logarithmic of the inverse of the error probability. The constant, however, is now different. The constant captures two things. Number one, we are in the restless arm setting. Number two, TPMs are known. It captures both of them. The fact that it captures TPMs are known comes in the minimum, where the minimum is now only over odd arm locations not equal to H. The minimum doesn't have P1 prime and P2 prime, like how we had in the rested setting. And of course, the constant is different because we are in the restless setting. Okay. So just to give you an idea of what the restless setting entails, suppose arm 1 is chosen at time 0, arm 2 is chosen at time 1. Notice how the local clock of arm 2 has already evolved. We missed looking at arm 2 at time t equal to 0. But you can't help it, it has already evolved. We got the observation x1, 2. Suppose arm 3 is now selected, we are at the next time instant, x2, 3. Similarly, x3, 4. Look at the subscript. The subscript tells you the time instant. So one can keep on going like this. Now, once all the arms have been sampled, there are two important quantities we are able to write down. These two quantities are what we call the delay of an arm and the last observed state of an arm. By delay, we mean how many time instants back was the arm selected. For example, with reference to time t equal to 4, the delay of arm 1 is 4 because arm 1 was last selected at time t equal to 0. Similarly, the delay of arm 2 is 3 in reference to time t equal to 4 because it was observed at time t equal to 1. So there is a certain loss of information because the arms are continuing to evolve even when not observed. So this is as far as the delays are concerned. So we are able to write down the delay of all the arms. Notice that the delay of arm 4 is equal to 1. Also, we write down what is the state of the arm that was observed when it was last observed. So here, for example, for arm 1, it is x01. For arm 2, it is x12. Likewise for the other arms. So we are able to write this down for every time instant now. Let's see how that can be done. Now, suppose arm 3 is selected. x43 is the observation that was collected. Then we have to update the last observed state now. The last observed state for arm 3 is x43, but for all the other arms, it remains the same. What is the delay of arm 3? Delay of arm 3 is 1 because we are now in time at time t equal to 5. We are standing at time t equal to 5 and asking what is the delay of each arm. So the delay of arm 1, arm 3 is 1, and the delay of all the other arms has incremented by 1. So this is the key idea. We keep updating the last observed states and the delays. The delay of only one of these arms is going to be equal to 1, and that represents which arm was selected at the previous time instant. And the delay of all the unobserved arms will keep incrementing by 1. And the last observed states will remain unaltered for the unobserved arms. For the observed arm, it will just get updated. Okay, fine. So this can keep on going. Now it turns out that in visual search experiments, although the subject who is participating in the experiment tends to focus his or her attention on a certain movie location, the actual location where he ends up focusing will be slightly different from the intended focus location. This neuroscientists have observed this to happen in practice. Okay, now this has to be brought into the problem setup somehow. And the way we bring this in is through what is called a trembling hand model. Okay, the way we capture this is as follows. Suppose BT is the intended location where the participant intends to look at, whereas AT is the actual location he ends up looking at. AT and BT will be equal with a very high probability. Let's say probability 1 minus eta. And AT is some uniformly randomly chosen location with probability eta. This is usually observed in practice. Okay. Here eta is what is called the trembling hand parameter. Okay, so imagine that you are clicking through a mouse click, you will have to identify the location of the odd movie. With very high probability, you will click the location you intended to click, but with a certain probability, you will click a randomly chosen location. That is what this means. So your hand trembles with a certain probability. So this is what is called the trembling hand parameter. Throughout the analysis, we are going to keep the trembling hand parameter fixed. Eta, we are going to keep eta fixed, and it will be some positive value. I will comment on what will happen when there is no trembling hand, how analysis will change, what are the difficulties. I will comment on that towards the end of the talk. Okay, so as in the rested setting, we have these transitions happening on the arms. And then again, the starting point of our analysis is the log likelihood ratio of all the observations and everything. Now, arm delays and the last observed states will come in. Notice the D here, which represents the arm delay. Notice the I, which represents the last observed state. There will be transitions on the arms, just like in the rested setting. But this time, these transitions will happen with certain delays. Okay, because we are not observing an arm all the time. We are observing arm with some intervals. So there will be transitions. So first, let's say, so in this figure, I have shown the rows are arms and the columns are times. Black squares indicate which arms were selected at which times. So here arm 2 was selected at time t equal to 2, t equal to 4, t equal to 5, 6, 9, and so on. And correspondingly, one can write down these delays. Okay. So if you were to count, there was state I0. After observing I0, there was a transition 2 units into the future. After that, I1 was observed. There was a transition 1 unit into the future. I2 was observed, transition 1 unit into the future. I3 was observed, transition 3 units into the future. Like this, it keeps happening. So if you were to count how many transitions into the future happened for each state, what will end up happening is that you will eventually end up counting how many time instants have elapsed up to a certain time. Okay. This is a very important condition. It looks so simple, but this is such an important condition because if you take limit as n goes to infinity, there is this limiting condition you will arrive at. This is simply counting how many time instants have elapsed based on what states were observed and how many units into the future transitions happened. This is counted for each possible value of the future transition delay and each possible state in the state space. Now, this is a very important condition. Why is this condition important? If we were to go ahead and derive the lower bound, just like how we did in the rested arms setting, we will end up with a constant R1 star in the information theoretic bottleneck upper bound. This is the analog of the Wald's lemma that I showed in the rested setting. Of course, you have to now adapt that lemma to restless arms. Nevertheless, one can derive an upper bound like this. One will arrive at a constant which is R1 star now. And this R1 star, as one can show, will have this kind of an expression. In this expression, notice this condition here. This is the condition that is the analog of the limiting condition that I showed on the previous slide. This simply counts how many time instants have passed. So there are all these subject to all these conditions. Okay, fine. But the thing is, on the previous slide, we were able to capture one condition, a very natural condition which simply counts the total number of time instants that have elapsed. What if there are more conditions? how are we very sure we have not captured all the conditions? Okay, how are we sure we have captured all the conditions? How are we sure we have not left out any condition? So something is not right in this approach because it doesn't naturally tell us that we have captured all the constraints. So why is it important to capture all the constraints? Because if we don't capture all the constraints, the R1 star we get here will not be a tight constant. This upper bound will not be tight. If this upper bound is not tight, there will be a data processing lower bound which is okay, it is quite tight. But because this is not tight, the eventual lower bound we derive will not be tight. So therefore, it is important to capture all the constraints, and somehow this approach doesn't give way for that. So we abandon this approach. So this approach was about looking at the delay and the last observed state of each arm individually. Instead, we tend to look at the delays and last observed states of all the arms together. Okay. So instead of the local arm perspective, instead of the perspective of viewing each arm separately, which we call the local perspective, we consider a global perspective where we look at the actions happening on all the arms together. Okay. What is the advantage of doing that? So let's say the delay of each arm is di of t, that is d1 of t through dk of t for the k arms, and the last observed states are I1 of t through ik of t at time t. Collect these into vectors, call them dtit. The entire history up to a certain time t can be equivalently summarized in terms of the delays and the last observed states and the B's. The B's are the intended actions. Remember the trembling hand model? There are B's, there are A's. The B's and the A's could be quite different from each other. With high probability, they'll be equal. Okay, so this entire history can be summarized in terms of the B's and the delays and the last observed states. Okay, so what is the point? The point is that instead of looking at each arm separately, if we look at all the arms together, that is, if we look at the DTIT, it turns out that this DTIT is a controlled Markov process with controls BT. Okay, so based on the entire history up to time t, we are going to pick BT. Our hand will tremble. There will be some AT. That AT will eventually define what is DT plus 1, IT plus 1. This way, the DTITs keep evolving. Okay, controlled Markov process simply means that DTIT is a Markov chain subject to control. Subject to control, it's a Markov chain. Okay, so what if this is a Markov? What if this is a controlled Markov chain? How does it make the problem better? Because we are in the setting of an MDP now. Okay, we have this nice way of transitioning from history to action to the updating of the history and all of this. So there is a natural MDP framework into which we fall. The state space of the MDP is the space of all possible delays and last observed states, all DI pairs. Action space is which arm, the action is what? The action is which arm we are going to pick at time t. So the action space is the space of arms. The state at time t is DTIT. That is a summary of what has happened up to time t. And then the action at time t is BT. Okay, we are in the setting of MDP, no doubt. So you can ask me, are we going into rewards, reward maximization, regret minimization? No, we should not deviate from our goal. The goal is still to characterize the limiting value of this growth rate, the time required to find the odd arm subject to error probability constraints. So MDP tuned to this goal is what we are interested in. And let's see how we are going to solve that. So this MDP has a certain transition probability. I'm not going into the details. There are only two important quantities that I would like to mention in this slide. Number one is the expression in the brackets here. This expression tells us about the trembling hand. With probability eta, we will select an arm uniformly at random. With probability 1 minus eta, we are going to select the arm that we intended to select. And these transition probabilities depend on the underlying parameters of the problem, which is the P1 and P2, depending on which arm we select. On the next slide, I show an example where transition probability also depends on P1. There is P1 in the expression.
Just a quick time check, Karthik.
Yes, sir.
You've used up about 50 minutes.
50 minutes,
so
okay.
You have now 0 minutes to finish it.
Okay, so I'll be quick. I'll try to summarize the key ideas. So whenever we think of MDPs, the thing that should come to our mind is ergodicity of the MDP. The ideas are the same, data processing, all of this. It turns out that in the MDP formulation, the trembling hand model that we had will guarantee that this MDP is ergodic. Okay. Now, once we have ergodicity, we can write down state action pair state action occupancy measures, and these occupancy measures are what will come in the expression for the lower bound. Okay, the R star constant. Instead of considering supremum over all state action distributions, we will consider supremum over only those state action distributions which are ergodic occupancy measures. Okay, so with this, we have this expression for R star in the constant, which is a constant in the lower bound. It turns out that the supremum here is very difficult to show, and therefore one may need to use a policy like Q-learning. And we cannot guarantee that there is a supremum, there is a policy which achieves the supremum here. So we resort to delta optimal solutions and we come delta close to the supremum. And that's how we eventually arrive at the lower bound. Okay, we come delta close, and by setting the delta, we are arbitrarily close to the lower bound. Okay, so that is as far as the policy is concerned. The key ideas are the same. The important fact in the restless setting was to recognize that there was a lift which was required. Instead of looking at only each of the arms separately, we had to look at all the arms together. That lift was important. And that lift came because we were looking at invariant quantities. In this case, the invariant quantities are transitions on each of the arms. In this case, the invariant quantity was the DI pairs. Okay, so that is what we wanted to attack. The final case is when the TPMs are also unknown, when the arms are restless. This is an even more difficult setting because we have to battle with uncountably many alternatives, just like in the rested setting. Now, the restless setting adds more difficulties because the arms are restless and we need to keep track of delays, last observed states, all of that. So the MDP, recall that these MDP transition probabilities depended on the P1 and the P2. P1 and P2 are not known, so these MDP transition probabilities are also parameterized by the problem instance, which is not known. So identifying what the true parameter of the MDP is what is the most important task here. Now, this is what is called the identifiability problem, okay, or the identification problem. And because the set of all problem instances is uncountably infinite, this identification is also quite difficult to do. The lower bound ideas are the same, okay, same ideas for the lower bound, just that this constant R star is now going to be different. It will reflect the fact that we are also battling with unknown TPMs. Again, there are delta optimal solutions, same difficulty as in the known TPMs case. Because the TPMs are also not known now, there is additional difficulty. Now the lambda so I said that we are going to operate with delta optimal solutions. So these delta optimal solutions, there can be more than one solution for each possible delta. And therefore, what happens is that for each configuration and each delta, there are multiple solutions, and it's not clear how these solutions are related to each other. Okay, one nice property we would like these solutions to have is that they are continuous. Okay, if they're continuous, it is like the continuity of lambda star in the rested setting. At least we will touch the lambda star for the underlying problem instance eventually. At least that we should be able to guarantee. And in order to do that, it's not straightforwardly clear we will be able to do that. So we assume that there is a continuous selection of delta optimal solutions for each delta. Okay, and also we cannot establish the results for arbitrary P1 and P2, which are not known. We can only establish them under certain regularity if they satisfy certain regularity conditions. So we establish achievability not for all possible arms configurations, but for those arms configurations which satisfy two important assumptions. One is that of continuous selection, other is that of regularity of TPMs. Okay, the important point here is that P1 hat and P2 hat are still ML estimates, but they don't have closed form expressions because the presence of arm delays in the log likelihood function doesn't enable us to compute P1 and P2 in closed form. In spite of that, we are able to show that they converge to the true values eventually. Of course, because of the continuity in the lambda stars will also converge. And therefore, we are able to get arbitrarily close to the lower bound by setting the parameter delta appropriately. This is in a nutshell. Okay, so these are the important ideas. In the last setting, we were able to establish the results only under certain assumptions, which seem to be quite necessary to carry out the analysis. Okay, So I said that we had this Tremblingham parameter eta and all of that. What if this eta is 0? How will this analysis look like? When eta is not 0, the upper and the lower bounds match. What will happen in the limit is the question. What we are able to show is that there are two quantities. One is limit as eta goes to 0 of the expression for expression of the lower bound for the case in eta is strictly positive. This limit is there, and then there is of course the quantity which is obtained by plugging eta equal to 0. Do these match is the question. Okay, the thing is that in the IID setting and the rested arms setting, these match. Okay, and this can be shown by the envelope theorem. In the restless setting, it is not clear. We only know that this limit is at most the value that would have been true if eta were 0. So we have 1 over R0 in the lower bound and 1 over the limit in the upper bound. The limit is less than or equal to the lower R0. This is what we are able to establish. It will be interesting to see if this is actually an equality. It is worth investigating that. And as I said, the computability of this R star in the restless setting is an issue. Q-learning, fine-tuned for restless planets, may need to be applied. Now, in practice, we may want to impose a certain condition saying that we will sample an arm if its delay has exceeded a certain value. But that is a very different policy, and it's not clear how to prove the ergodicity of the MDP in such cases. We have only characterized the first order term. What about the second order term? Okay, what we say is that the growth rate of the time to find the odd arm looks like logarithm of 1 over epsilon times an alpha, which depends on the transition matrices of the odd and the non-odd arms. What about higher order terms? Can we characterize these higher order terms? Is there a G such that this is true? If it is true, what is the role of beta? What role does beta have? What is the meaning of beta? And so on. We have not taken switching costs into account. That is the cost for switching between locations, between arms. But however, in the cognitive radio example I told, switching between channels may be quite expensive. So it may be interesting to study the same problem with switching costs incorporated. I said that the participant in the experiment tends to fix his attention at a certain location, one location at a time. That may not be true. We grasp multiple objects at once. How can we model that in the problem? Also, the participant may not remember the entire history of all the actions and observations that are seen up to a certain point. That is what we used in the analysis. But the participant's memory may be limited to certain T units into the past. What if that is the case? How will it change the analysis is something that will be interesting to look at. And of course, best arm odd arm identification, best arm identification, all of these can be generalized to certain general sequential hypothesis testing frameworks. Can we do that? So this work has already been done for the case of IID observations from the arms. Can we extend the analysis to Markov observations like we had in our problem? We have not considered hidden Markov observations. Our observations were noiseless. What if there is noise? How does hidden Markovity play a role in the analysis? So that will be something interesting to consider. And these are the sources from where I got my scholarship for doing my PhD. I'd like to thank all these sources. And my heartfelt thanks to my advisor, Professor Rajesh, and Professor Sri Krishna, who is one of the reviewers for the thesis, and Professor Avrachenko, who is the other reviewer. I would like to thank all of them. And all of these professors have helped me immensely. The student brigade, I cannot forget any of them. They have all helped me at various stages of my PhD. So thanks to all of them. And this is a key takeaway slide. With this, I leave you. Thank you.
Thank you, Karthik. You can probably put us on the takeaway slide.
Yeah.
The floor is now open for questions.
Rajesh, can I say a few words? What is the procedure? Who should start?
Yeah, anybody can start. Kostya, I invite you to ask your questions, and you can ask two questions or so, then leave it to others to ask questions, and then come back and exhaust all your questions. So yeah, this is there are two parts. The current part will be something which will be for everyone, so anybody can ask a question. Then there is a second one where we will actually ask specific questions about the thesis, maybe questions that you might have. That will be an in-camera one, that will be a private one. So there the general audience will be requested to leave. Right now it is in the open.
So I'm a bit confused. Shall I ask my technical questions here or delay it to later? Or I'm not participating in the second part?
No, you can participate in the second part. You're invited to that as well. If your question is something that you would like others, the general audience also to hear about, you can go ahead and ask now.
Okay. First of all, I would like to express my what should I say? My astonishment, I would say, of in a very positive sense of how much you have accomplished in your thesis. I think your thesis is so large and use so many techniques that I think it goes honestly beyond an average PhD thesis. So you master techniques from sequential hypothesis testing to Markov chains to the other information theoretical and statistical tools, even to reinforcement learning. So you really covered a huge amount of mathematical tools, and you use them for the deep analysis, not it's not superficial. So I'm honestly impressed.
Thank you so much, Professor. Yeah, I'm humbled by your comments. Thank you very much.
Yeah. So maybe one question of a general interest would be so maybe for everybody, what you would like to do in the thesis and you couldn't because maybe of the lack of time. So you really wish you would achieve, but you couldn't. So what is the and it's not a critic. It's just I'm curious. What is the most challenging problem which remains in this research direction, according to you?
Okay, so at least for me, I'm very much eager to resolve the second order term in the expression for the time required to find the odd arm. So there was this Taylor series kind of a term that we have, the expansion. So we characterized the first order term. We now understand what this constant represents. It captures the hardness of the problem, and it's so nice. It gives such a nice meaning to the problem. But what do these second order terms represent? If at all there is a G which satisfies this expression, what role does beta, this constant beta here, play? What is the meaning of that in the context of the problem? This is something that has intrigued me, but we were not able to do this because of lack of time. This is one problem that I would like to invest my energy on.
And it's in all type of setting, right? Rested, restless.
Right? Yes, all settings. Yes, even in the IID setting. Even in the IID setting, this is not.
Even in IID setting is still not characterized.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Any other questions? While we wait, Karthik, can you tell us about the eta equal to 0 case and eta going to 0?
Yeah, I think I rushed through it a little.
No. As a challenge, what is the challenge there? Are there
so the challenge
conditions
is the
under which you know that they are equal? The limit
correct.
Eta goes to 0.
Yeah, I think it's important to shed some light on that from a theoretical standpoint. So this R star, the expression I have shown here in blue is for the case where the arms are restless and the TPMs are known, the second setting. Now, this R star clearly depends on the trembling hand parameter eta. So let's explicitly write it as R eta star, just to be sure that it depends on eta. And we know that R eta stars in the lower bound and the upper bound, the upper and the lower bounds match for the case when eta is 0. So eta is strictly positive. We know that. Now what happens is eta goes to 0 is the question. Now it turns out that one can show as eta goes to 0, R eta star blows up. That is, R eta star is monotonic in eta. Okay, so it blows up. It could potentially blow up to plus infinity. Nevertheless, limit R eta star exists. Okay. Let's say R0 star is the corresponding quantity of R eta star obtained by plucking eta equal to 0. So that is R0 star. Does this blowing up of the R0 stars eventually go and hit R0 star is the question. Does the blowing up of these R eta stars eventually hit R0 star is the question. So this is the question that we are after. In the settings of IID observations from the arms and rested arms, this is indeed the case. It actually goes and hits R0 star. And this can be established by a simple application of envelope theorem. But in the restless setting, we do not know if this is an equality. All we know is that this is an inequality. What is it that needs to be resolved in order to resolve this inequality to an equality? Now, here is mu lambda. You see mu lambda here. For any given eta, the mu lambda is the stationary distribution corresponding to a stationary arm selection policy pi lambda. Lambda is simply a conditional distribution here. Okay, in the rested setting, lambda was an unconditional probability distribution on the arms. We just had lambda of A. But in the restless setting, we have lambda of A given the DIs. Okay, so there is this conditional distribution. Corresponding to each lambda, there is a mu lambda, which is because of the trembling hand model, there is ergodicity. Now, in the case when eta equal to 0, we don't have this ergodicity. This ergodicity does not come to us when eta is equal to 0. When eta is strictly positive, ergodicity comes for free. But one may have to do something more to establish ergodicity in the eta equal to 0 case. Not just that, if you were to parameterize these mu lambdas by putting in another parameter, which is eta, mu lambda eta, there are 3 parameters now. So there is mu lambda eta. Lambda and eta, both of them parameterize these stationary distributions. It turns out that if you collect these mu lambdas across all the etas, there is a certain tightness condition that needs to be verified in order to make sure that this is actually an equality. Just verifying the tightness may not do. Something more needs to be applied. This is all based on certain results from the theory on controlled Markov chains. Okay. So some sort of a tightness condition on the stationary probability distributions needs to be verified, and we have not been able to do that. So I think that is also one important area that is worth investigating. So here was the envelope theorem. The analog is not known in the restless case.
The tightness is with respect to the parameter or the family parameterized by eta.
Yes, the family parameterized by eta. Correct. It's actually not, it's on the family parameterized by eta.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, I see no further hands. So what we will now do is we will request the audience to log off, and I will request Professor Sri Krishna Bhashyam and Dr. Konstantin Avrichenko alone to remain. Then we will have the further questions on the thesis. Okay, Karthik, you should also remain.
Yeah.
Thank you for the audience for coming to this.
Yeah, thanks to everyone for coming to the talk.
Okay, so Karthik,
sir, should I stop the recording?
Yes, you can stop the recording. Yeah.
Okay.